Hello everybody and welcome to Board With Each Other, the board gaming review podcast that looks at board games through the lens of playing them as a pair. Whether that's with your partner, your BFF, or with a spouse that continuously refers to herself as the Mother of Dragons.
I am the Mother of Dragons.
On that note, I'm Simpson. I'm joined as ever by my co-host, Player 2, and lovely wife, Hannah Kelly.
Hi guys.
And today, in this month's episode, we are going to be reviewing the card-driven engine builder that is Wyrmspan. Wyrmspan is a remix, rewrite, and renew of the world-straddling, incredibly popular Wingspan. And it is not the same game. It's about 75% the same game as far as I understand it. I just want to put a caveat at the start of the episode that neither of us have actually played Wingspan. It's never sort of grabbed me enough to pick up a copy, mainly because I'm not that interested in birds.
Yeah, why would you go for birds when you could go for dragons?
And I was sort of considering it when this came around, but I was like, oh, okay, there's a dragon one now, let's go with that. But as far as I understand it, this is the same but different. It's not sort of compatible with it. There's quite a few new mechanics, and it is slightly more complex than the original Sans expansions, obviously. I know there's a lot of expansions to Wingspan that add a lot to it, but just sort of vanilla out of the box is supposed to be the slightly more complicated of the two. How the game works, and the premise of the game, is you are the owner of 3 dragon caves, and within those dragon caves, you need to basically excavate them and dig them out, and place dragons into those caves, and then take a stroll through your lovely collection of dragons, who don't eat you for reasons unknown, and accumulate resources, building an engine, as it were, through sort of a tableau that you have out on your player board in front of you. How that works is games played over 4 rounds of multiple turns. On a turn, each player will take 1 action each. To take an action, you usually have to spend a coin, of which you get 6 every turn. There are ways to get more via cards during the game, but 6 is the basic sort of start that you have every turn. And with those coins, you can take 1 of 3 actions. You can excavate your caves, which means you place a cave card down on one of the open slots. The leftmost the leftmost slot of all of your caves start off the game excavated, so you can start placing dragons immediately. But after that, you need a cave placed down over an empty slot in order to place a dragon there. Those cave cards usually have instant effects, so most of the time they'll gain you resources, sometimes cards. Sometimes it'll move you forward on the Dragon Guild marker, which I'll get onto in a minute. You can entice a dragon. You don't buy dragons, you entice them. Mm-hmm. And you do so by spending a coin to take the action and then paying the resources.
It would be immoral, I think, to buy dragons.
Yeah, I think it would be. You definitely have to entice them, show a bit of leg. Or failing that, some milk and gold.
We'll get to the milk.
I'm sure we will get to the milk. You start the game with 3 resources of your choice, so you can start placing dragons potentially straight away. I think off the top of my head, there are 5 resources: milk, meat, gold, crystal, and
coin.
And coins. Yeah.
Or eggs.
Yeah, eggs as well. So each dragon will have a listed cost on it. You pay the resources, you place the dragon card down. Some dragon cards will have a immediate effect. Some dragon cards will have an effect that occurs at the end of every round. Others will have an end game effect, and others will have an effect of when you walk past them when you go exploring, which is your third action. To explore, you place a coin down on the cave that you want to explore, and you basically walk along a track that is made half by the player board, but also half by the dragon cards that you put down. And depending on which row you go for, the top one is resource focused, the middle one is dragon card focused, the bottom one is cave card focused. You will collect those as you go, and any special when you walk past your abilities you've had on your dragons that you place down. Play continues until both players either run out of coins or pass. When that occurs, each round has a randomly generated scorecard associated with it, and one specific criteria. So, for example, it'll want who's got the most large dragons on your player mat, or who's got the most playful dragons on your player mat. And you will get the victory points in that are ranked, but you have to pay to play, basically. So if for example it said you need shy dragons and you've got 0, you will get 0 points. You won't come second just by participating. Those point values on those ramp up from round to round. So the first one is relatively low, the last one is quite significant. And then you basically reset everything, get your 6 coins back, and begin a new round. There is a marketplace which has 3 dragon cards and 3 cave cards on at any time, and most of the time when you gain cards, you can choose to either gain them from the marketplace or from the top of the deck, as is quite usual for games of this nature. And at the end of every round, you completely wipe and refresh the display, so things don't get bogged down by things nobody wants. There are additional mechanics on some of the dragons that allow you to either tuck cards underneath them or cache resources on top of them. Those are usually worth victory points at the end of the game, and some dragons have particular effects. If you cache or tuck, it's usually the 3rd card that you do, it'll have a bonus effect. The only other thing to mention is the Dragon Guild board. So it is a circular board that has resources and cards and what have you as bonuses that you work your way around with a marker. So as soon as you land on or pass any of the prizes, squares, I don't know what to call them, on the board, you would gain everything that you passed, including the one that you landed on. When you're halfway round the circle, and when you're all the way around the circle, you get to place a marker on the Dragon Guild card. That's also randomised at the start of the game. And those markers sort of stay there permanently, and there's only so many slots for each of them. And some of them will have instant impacts. For instance, you'll gain a coin and 2 resources. Some of them will pertain to endgame abilities, so you'll get 3 points at the end of the game for every full column of dragons you have, for example. And there's also a row at the bottom that has a slot for 6 victory points, 3 victory points, and 1, which again you gain at the end of the game. Once the 4th round is over, you tot up your scores, and most of the scoring tends to come from the actual printed scoring values on all of your dragons out on the board, and from that guild track that I mentioned. But you get bonus points for resources, you get bonus points for end-game scoring abilities. There's a wide variety of point salad scoring that comes into that at the end.
In terms of game length, it's a fairly quick one.
Yeah, but not that quick. I'd say about 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Around the 45-minute mark with 2 players. We have had a couple that go on a little bit longer, and we've had a few that are a bit shorter. But it depends on thinking time, really.
How much I prefer it. So can we talk about the milk?
Yeah, we can talk about the milk.
So, as Al mentioned, you have to entice your dragons, and typically you entice them with 1 of 4 or multiple resources. They're gold. That makes sense. Dragons like gold. Crystals, yeah, they like it's a hoard loot. Meat. Yep, we all know that dragons eat meat. And milk.
I mean, who doesn't like a cool, refreshing glass of milk?
Reptiles. Reptiles don't like milk.
Think of the heartburn. It's a natural antacid.
No, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, it was a bit of a stumbling block for me, I've got to be honest.
Yeah, it really took you a while to get over it from a law perspective.
Yeah, I think for a really long time I chose not to play dragons that required milk because,
you just disagreed
it's wrong.
with it. They're lactose intolerant. What did anybody think of the dragons?
But aside from the milk issue, we haven't talked about eggs.
No, we haven't talked about eggs. Once per turn, you get to lay an egg. There are 2 spots for that on your player board, and your dragons have multiple egg slots on them. Some things cost eggs, particularly when you're taking repetitive actions on one space. So if you explore multiple times on one cave in a turn, it'll start costing you an increasing amount of eggs.
And to lay your final 2 cave cards cost eggs.
Yeah, the 3rd column costs 1 egg, the 4th column costs 2 eggs alongside your silver coin. They're also worth 1 victory point each at the end of the game, so if you start amassing eggs, it can start tallying up quite quickly.
Yeah. So, straight out of the bag, it's a game about dragons. I was quite happy. This was a birthday present as well. Yes, any game that involves dragons makes me quite happy.
Yes.
And they're all quite cute.
Yeah, everybody who's listened to the podcast before will know that anything vaguely fantasy related and dragon related, Hannah's on board. And sort of saw that this had come out, and I straight away I was like, we need to get a copy of that. Somebody will like that. So yeah, I think now, rules aside, do you want to get on to some scoring? Is there anything else you want to talk about before?
Yeah, no, I think that's about it.
We crack on?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So, as always, we review the game on a general basis, and then we move on to our 2-player rating. So, on to the first of our general categories, we have components. So, that includes things like the board space, setup, that sort of thing.
And the quality of the components.
And the quality of the components.
Yeah. Do you want to kick off with it?
Yeah, so first of all, fine. So it's dragons, but also the illustrations on the card are really, really lovely, and they're really, really pretty.
Yeah.
It's a very cutesy...
Well, it straddles a line for me between cutesy and actually just quite cool. They haven't gone full on like cartoony with it. There's a little bit of grit to them. You know, they're quite they're very. It's this nice middle zone between cutesy and I would
real
say
world
like
dragons.
real world fantasy, if you will. So you know, halfway between Nickelodeon and Game of Thrones, really.
The cards are really cute and the illustrations are really lovely. I also want to shout out to the eggs themselves. The eggs are really well made. They are wooden. They're quite tiny, so quite fiddly, but they're really pretty. And again, they've got like flicks of different colour on them.
Yeah, they're gorgeous.
They're really well made and they're really lovely.
Forbidden mini eggs.
Yeah. Don't even eat. No.
No, they are really good. I mean, I think I read somewhere, if by some chance you're reading this, person that wrote this online, that Stonemeir games are kind of like the Apple of board games, where everything's very, very slick and stylish, and you come to expect a certain quality of product from them. I know from my experience with Scythe and with this, there's a very professional, well-made sheen to everything.
Yeah, and that makes sense, because one thing that I was going to mention was the little... the boxes that we
come with little token trays.
Little token trays, which is a really, really lovely touch.
Yeah.
And I absolutely value and appreciate a game designer that puts those in. However, they're not big enough, and there aren't enough of them. So there are only 4 of them, but there are lots more resources, and I'm a bit confused as to why they picked 4 as the number. I guess so. I mean, there's not something to mark them down on, because they're the only games that seem to come with them at all, full stop. True. I mean, to be fair, at this point in our board gaming relationship, we probably should just invest in some ourselves.
Some actual token, yeah.
But, I appreciate it nonetheless.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. But the whole package is just incredibly well made, it's incredibly slick, everything's of really nice quality, the cards feel great, everything's quite weighty. The player boards, it's got this sort of pastely pink kind of colour scheme to it, which normally I wouldn't like, but I actually quite like it. I think it looks good. I think the matchingness of it all is everything sort of blends together out on the table. Yeah, it's very aesthetically pleasing. You get a full-scale compendium of every dragon in the game with lore write-ups associated with each, and there's hundreds, so I have to admire the ludicrous effort that probably went into that for no real reason aside from to
God,
make
if
it
there was
nicer.
a job, that would be the job that I would want. Make up backstories for dragons.
Don't let your dreams be dreams.
Who do I
Actually do. We need a paycheck. But yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful package. It really is. And in terms of setup and tear down, quite quick and simple.
Yeah, again, once you've separated everything to baggies, it becomes really quite easy.
Yeah.
You do have quite a few small little tiny tokens. So, for example, the things that you use to mark victory points on the guild tracker. But I mean, that's all part of the course, really.
Yeah,
it's just a cube, you know?
They're not that fiddly. The only bugbear, but yeah, I have the same issue with Ark Nova, is trying to shuffle the bloody deck.
Yeah.
Because as with Ark Nova, and I think Terraforming Mars is similar from what I've heard, there's a rise of the deck of many things, which is these massive main decks that you play with. And it's great because of replayability, but shuffling them is a little bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, so it's probably not one of the ones you actually want to shuffle. It's more like dealing out 8 piles.
Just sort of you have an effort at it. You have an effort at shuffling, but yeah, it is quite painful to do so.
Slight bugbear maybe is that your cave cards are much smaller than your dragon cards, and there's a reason for that, so that when you lay them out and you play them, but it's annoying to hold them in your hands.
Yeah, that's never really bothered me.
Does it not?
No.
Maybe it's because you've got big hands.
Yes, maybe. Yeah, I don't. I just tend to order them and hold them and fan them out. That's been all.
So maybe I'm being picky.
I just got really tiny hands. Yeah, so I mean, on that basis, I've given it a 9 because I've got very, very little to criticise this about in this vein.
Yeah, so I gave it an 8. The reason
Yeah.
I didn't score it higher was because the trays they gave us, which I feel admittedly is slightly mean because they gave us trays.
Yeah.
But I don't understand why you gave us the wrong number and they're too small.
Pro tip, designers, unless you're going to do something very, very generously, just don't bother with Hannah. she won't mark you down for it. Oh, there was an attempt, Stonemeir. I'm still not satisfied. Right, okay,
God
moving
knows
on.
how I ever married you.
That's why I just don't try. There you go, a bit of insight there. Right, shall we go to complexity? So, for those unfamiliar with our scoring, this is not complex game is good, simple game is bad. This is how well the rule set of the game suits the gameplay and how well it all works together.
How much we argue about the rules.
Yes, that too.
And how much time I sit there thinking about my moves.
Yeah, I mean, that's more just you. Less the game. So, what are your thoughts on complexity?
So, I think that it's a really nice fit. I think that, and I don't know whether this is part of Wingspan originally, but the guild tracker.
Yeah, that's not in Wingspan.
Yeah, so the guild tracker, and I thought that might have been added later, is a really lovely way just to be able to add that additional layer of complexity and strategy and depth to the game that I think probably you would really miss without having it there.
Yeah.
So not only are you thinking about immediately on your player board and also, what you're aiming for each round, you're also thinking about what points you can get on your guild tracker and at what time point to pull them and what that's going to do to your final victory scores. And I think we've had some games that have really been cinched because of the guild tracker.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree with you. I think it's a great mechanic, and I think it adds one more thing to have an eye over.
Yeah.
And I think for a medium weight game like this, it has a real sweet spot where you don't fancy some 2-hour brain burny epic clash. There's that in between bit, and I think it's one of those things that we've been missing on our shelf for quite a while because we tend to go either light or heavy, or like medium heavy. We haven't got that much that's in between, and I think there's just enough going on here to keep my brain interested and tickled, and there's enough to keep an eye on between your board, your opponent's board, the marketplace, the Dragon Guild markers, and the round scoring criteria. I think it hits a real sweet spot for me.
One of the things that I will say is there is quite a lot of luck based in this. Whilst you can cycle through cave cards and whilst you can cycle through dragon cards, if you just keep drawing a rubbish hand, you can get really stuck. But I think your Dragon Guild is a way of being able to then mitigate that a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's such a fantastic addition.
Yeah, I was going to talk about luck in one of the later categories personally, but I'll bring the discussion here. I think...
Thank you for tabling it for discussion.
No, just skip it forward. I could see people getting quite frustrated with this until they learned the ways that you can mitigate it. I think the 2 resources to swap for the 2 resources a wild thing is great. I think it would really suffer without that. I think you have to plan ahead a little bit because you can place yourself in a bit of a corner. I think people might get a bit snooty about the criteria for the first round. Because you can have a thing that, you need playful dragons, then your opponent could have had 2 in their starting hand, which is 3. You start with 3 dragons in your hand. You could have 0, and there could be 0 in the marketplace, which almost by default you've then lost that round. However, I think the game mitigates that by the scoring on the first round for that scoring criteria being quite light. I think if you win it, you get 4 points. I mean, 4 points is nothing. You lay 4 eggs and you've caught up. So while you can get screwed out of getting anything on that first round by the luck of the draw, I think anything that comes after that is there's a lot to do with the player there.
And again, you can see what your victory conditions are in the final scoring round. So actually quite often in the first round I'll be working towards that already.
Yeah.
Certainly the first few games that we played, I did get a little bit screwed over in terms of cards, and I did lose a lot, and I did find it quite frustrating.
Yeah.
It was only when I started realising the value of the guild tracker that I began to sort of be able to mitigate. Plus, also, embracing the fact that dragons do drink milk, and therefore I probably should play a dragon and then I started playing dragons that required milk.
But yeah, I think some people may be initially put off by that happening. I would say power through it a little bit, because the more you play it, the more you realise how much mitigation is there. Yeah. And yes, luck is a factor. There's no getting out of it, but it's not as luck-based as it first appears.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that later, but
Okay,
I guess
right.
it's, yeah.
Fine. But yeah, like I said, I think it hits a real sweet spot for me.
Yeah.
It's definitely not a light game, but it definitely fills a slot for when you don't have as much time or your brain's just not up to something that's, massively expansive. So I'll go give it an 8.
Yep, I also scored it an 8.
Okay, lovely.
So then on to shelf life. So under shelf life, we talk about things like value for money, but we
Yep.
also talk about that replayability factor. So are we still going to be playing it in a year, 5 years, 10 years' time?
Yeah.
So what's the price point?
I think this goes for somewhere between the 40 and 50 range, depending.
So I think for that kind of price, with the components that you get and the huge big whopping stack of cards that have obviously had quite a lot of production value go into them, I think that's a really reasonable price point.
Yeah, I think for a big box board game, of what you get in the box, I think it's perfectly fine. I don't think it's like, oh wow, the value for money, but for a game of that size without miniatures, 40 to 50 is what you pay, and I think the production values are good compared to some of the games I probably paid similar for, so I've got zero complaints there. They do have the advantage of being a big publisher, so you get to pull production costs down a bit, which is all great. We see that at the end of the day, don't we? So, yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of replayability, well, you've already kind of hit the nail on the head. There is a whopping stack of cards. So you've got a constant variety of charming dragons, sometimes aggressive, but often charming dragons. And then you have that random factor by randomising your end of the round victory conditions and also your guild, which guild you go with. So there is a lot of randomisation involved in it. I would say what's quite interesting is we've obviously played quite a few games of this, but actually the engine that you build is often very different as well.
Oh yeah, massively different from game to game.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really telling and really interesting, that you have to build your engine around what you've got in your hand or where your board state is taking you, and that often looks quite different.
Yeah.
So that also speaks, I think, to the level of replayability that's there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of replayability. I think, realistically for me, and this is more to do with the depth and what's involved in the game, I could see myself becoming a bit bored with it in like 20 to 30 plays, maybe. I don't know for sure, but I don't know. I don't know if there's enough there to keep bringing me back for years and years and years. I mean, not every board game has to have that. That's fine.
I also think that we've hit this quite hard because it's filled this spot which we've had missing for quite some time.
Yeah. And I'm not feeling bored of it yet, but...
Yeah, and so I think we've played it quite hard, quite intensively, and as a result, that novelty might wear off.
Yeah.
But actually, I can honestly see myself still digging this out.
Quite a while in the future.
Yeah, quite a while
Fair
in
enough.
the future.
Saying that, Wingspan got, I don't know, 55 expansions or whatever it was. I say exaggerate, of course I do. But it got a lot of support. Throw a couple of expansions with some new mechanics at this once a year, for me, that might bring me back over and over and over again. I think there'll be a lot of life in this for me yet, and I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's negative shelf life. I can just foresee a time where I might find this start to get a little bit dull, but that's far in the future. I don't think it's now. So that basis combined with the value of money, I gave it a 7.
I also gave it a 7.
Yeah.
The reason I gave it a 7 is possibly because of the whole too much luck thing.
Yeah, okay.
Rather than perhaps maybe more strategy, but I think we kind of talked about that already. But
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. I think what's also interesting with some of these categories is where you bring things in. So that's affected perhaps the shelf life for you, whereas for me that's more a competitiveness thing. And it's just interesting, just a aside.
I think it's because when I talk about things like replayability, there is an element of I want to be building on strategy, or I want to be building on my ability to do better.
You want to get better at the game, yeah.
And when there's a high degree of luck, well, actually, to a certain extent, it's out of my hands a little bit.
Yeah, fair enough.
So
Yeah,
perhaps
that makes complete sense. Yeah.
reason why.
Okay.
And then on to our final category under the general scoring criteria, and that is fun. So do you have any fun when you play it?
Yes, I do. Yeah, it very much is fun.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. It's got a really satisfying click to it when you build your engine. If you get an engine working, I've managed one so far, which seemed to be a never-ending, perpetuating money factory.
Yeah.
I don't quite know how I managed it, but I eventually passed because I just, it was ridiculous. It was unstoppable, and that was really satisfying. Obviously, it depends what you get and having to think your way around the puzzle that your hand and the other player and the scoring criteria are presenting to you. But luck aside, there is a lot of strategy in this, and the strategy is not so complex, labyrinthine, and deep that without having to really, really think, you can have quite an impact on the game. It's that seeing your strategy come to life without having to think way, way too hard about it. Which again fits a sweet spot for me on certain evenings. There's some evenings where I want, labyrinthine and all the rest of it, but when I don't, this is really good for that.
The flip side is that it can be quite frustrating. So if you don't get it working and it doesn't quite pay off, it can be quite a frustrating experience. Again, that's my whole issue with the luck. But you prefer luck more than I do, I think, in a game. Yeah. So it's that two sides of the same coin. Yeah. That said, I wouldn't say that it's not a fun game. I still scored it a 7.
Yeah. No, yeah, I mean, I do enjoy it, and it's a fun game to play. You keep telling each other names of your dragons and look at the artwork, and it's a pleasant experience, but without being too dull and light.
Yeah, there's something really quite lovely about being able to take a waltz through your dragon cave. Possibly the names of some of the caves.
Yeah, I need to get hold of some of his dragon repellent. So I gave it an 8 because I have a lot of fun playing this. It's a really good time, and particularly with that engine works. You can paint yourself into a corner, or you can go a bit too hard on something, and then that doesn't pan out, which is mildly frustrating. But I have never found it that frustrating. I just kind of shrugged and got over it. And I think what helps is it's quite
a
light-hearted game, so I don't feel that overly invested in that sense.
You talked about Scythe being like a comparator. Everything about the board is quite intense. Your mechs are all quite intense. It's the complete opposite. It's lots of pastel colours. It's very warm feeling. Cute eggs, lovely little dragons. You can't.
It's cosy.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's cosy, but
no, as cosy as dragons go.
Okay, so let's add up those scores. So that gives us an average score of 7.8. So as always, we round up or down. That gives us a score of 8.
Yeah, good solid 8 for general scoring of Wyrmspan, which I'm really happy with. Yeah, it's an 8 out of 10.
Right. So let's move on to our 2-player rating scale. So this is now thinking about specifically about how does this game work at 2. So under our first criteria, we have table talk. So that includes things like how much banter, getting to know you,
and how much direct player interaction there is.
And direct player interaction. Thoughts?
So it is not a solitaire game you play together, as we encounter quite a bit. Some people may see it like that, but I've actually found that there's quite a degree of player interaction on this one. I think because of its simplicity, it's quite easy to keep an eye on what the other person is up to. And it's quite easy to block them. Picking cards out from the display that they need, playing cards that are going to have an impact on your scoring criteria that they're going for. I think it's not a direct head-to-head, and you can't really mess with each other too much, but I do think it's there. Which impressed me, because when I first started playing it, I thought, this is another one of these.
I don't know I entirely agree with you.
Okay, that's fine. You could disagree with me.
So we do talk quite a lot as we play it, because we will read out the name of the card, and as we go walking over our cave, we'll explain what we're doing, etc.
Yeah.
But you don't have to.
No.
And I think that's because we talk an awful lot, and that's how we play. So I don't think the game forces you or pushes you into that interaction.
No.
And I think you could play it almost completely silently if that's either your inclination or perhaps your play style. I acknowledge your point about blocking each other, but also I think because your hand is so limited most often, well, not always, because you can amass loads of cards.
You tend to from like the second round onwards.
You always have to discard down though, don't you? So you can never have like a massive hand.
Yeah, we have 9.
But because of that, whilst you might think you're blocking me, actually you might just be pissing in the wind and you've got no idea what it is that I'm doing.
Yeah, perhaps. But the amount of swearing that came out of you on several occasions when I did it makes me think otherwise.
Yeah, once or twice, perhaps, maybe.
So yeah, I mean, okay, fine. So what are your thoughts though? Do you think it's poor for that, or
I don't know, it's hard to know, isn't it? Because, like I say, we do talk an awful lot. We do have that interaction, so it is there if you want it. But if you're looking for a game where it is encouraging you to have discussion or encouraging you to strategise, I suppose it's a competitive game though, isn't it? So you don't want to do it a huge amount. I don't think there is a lot of touch points built into the game for that.
Yeah, I think you're correct on that front. I mean, I haven't given this a huge score for this. I think just when I first cracked it out and first played it, I was expecting this to be very quite low, but it's actually crept up a little bit for me over time.
Oh, see maybe that's the difference then, because I didn't think it was going to be as quiet as this.
Fair enough, okay.
And so therefore, perhaps maybe I had higher expectations that have fallen short all the way around. Okay.
I mean, to skip to the score quickly, because I mentioned it, I've given this a 6.
Oh, wow, okay.
So I think it's slightly above average, but I think I was expecting a 3 when we first started playing it.
Yes, that's why I've scored it.
I was expecting something that was completely Mystic Vale level, you know, completely separate, playing together, and I don't think it is that. And the more I play it, the less I think it's that. I think there's also an awful lot going on in front of you, and I think there's a lot of sort of interaction with the space, and I don't know. There's something there that is slightly above what I usually expect from this type of game.
Okay. Like I say, well, I scored it a 3. Do I want to revise my score? No, not really. I don't know where I scored Mystic Vale as comparison. And it's random scoring of the evening. But yeah,
and it's random scoring criteria.
That's why I put it.
But yeah,
I want to talk to my dragons more. Okay.
Yeah, well, you can talk to your dragons anyway. It's not talking to me though, is it? It doesn't come into table talk. Have your alone time with your dragons. But yeah, I think it's slightly above average in general, and there's more there than I thought, and maybe that's just me. Maybe that's the way it's hitting me. But it's objective opinion. Subjective, not objective. Subjective.
Okay, I'm going to say a little bit more, but I'm going to wait until the next category.
Okay.
So should we move on to the next category, which is competitiveness and co-op/cooperability?
Yeah, competitiveness in this case.
Okay. So for me, this is one of those games that I found quite difficult to score because obviously it's competitive. Obviously we are trying to get most points. But because you don't have that intense sort of head-to-head nature, you're not often... you don't necessarily have that high level of interaction or interactivity. It doesn't feel as competitive as perhaps other games that we have of a similar nature.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fine. I think... I agree with you, partially. I think it's... On the surface level, you could quite happily just play this for the fun of it, and nothing really matters. However, I do think that it is a game that you can get better at.
Yep.
I do think there's skill involved.
Yep.
Which is, for me anyway, a big building block of a competitive game. And I think the better you get, the more competitive it will get. Yeah,
I mean, I will say that the level of competitiveness between us has increased again, I think, as we've perhaps got better.
Yeah.
I think one of the other complicating factors is a bit like quite a lot of these kinds of games, there are multiple scoring criteria. It is not just points on a victory track.
Point salad.
Yeah, point salad. Is that a thing?
That's the general term for it.
And therefore it does make it quite difficult to know, and I always find this really difficult. So I found this again with like Terra Mystica to a certain extent and other things as well. I don't necessarily know how I'm doing, therefore it then becomes an internal competition with myself.
Yeah, and some would argue that's a feature, not a bug. It's to stop you knowing when you're winning.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a criticism.
People also get put off games because they know they're not going to win in the end. I get why they do the whole sort of everything's there. If you wanted to really sit there and add everything up, but like Scythe, you could.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a criticism. It just, for me, it means that it is a little bit less competitive
because you're kind of playing.
Yeah,
in a bit of a vacuum. Yeah, I suppose that makes sense.
And then without the lack of trash talk.
Yeah, well, as things progress, maybe. And yeah, I agree with you that it lacks a nail biting edge. It lacks a real head to head edge. This is not Dune Imperium. But I don't think it's non-competitive.
Yeah.
I do think it is satisfying to win, which is always a thing for me in this. And when I win, I don't feel like I've fallen into it. I know a game that I phoned in, I got battered.
Yeah.
I absolutely battered.
And here's the other thing. I don't... Again, we're not necessarily talking about how competitive it is for the game that it is, but there is that certain element. It is a cutesy... looking, feeling game. I don't know that I want to be battling our dragons.
I don't think you're battling.
That's a different game entirely.
That's a different game entirely. Yeah, that's yeah. Bring me a.
That's one for unmatched.
Yeah, bring me a battle dragon skirmishing game. I'm all over it. But yeah, no, this is not it.
You know,
it's not.
And so do I mark it down for that? I don't know, because again, it does feel like an appropriate amount of competitiveness for the game that it is.
Yeah.
Could it be more competitive? Yes.
Yeah.
And I also think there are lots of people who do get put off by that really confrontational
absolutely.
nature of games, and you don't have it in this, and that might be a really lovely way of being able to introduce a bit of competition, you know, in a two-player environment, where I think it often feels a lot more personal, doesn't it, when it's like two of you?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's one of the reasons of the rise of popularity of the solitaire, you play together type games, is because it's nobody's feeling to get hurt at the end of the day, because you're usually kind of playing yourself a little bit. I do think there's more to, as I've already mentioned, I do think there's more to this one than that. But it is thin margins. Like I say, this is not a Dune Imperium, this is not a skirmish battler. This is not something that you're really up against the other person all the time, and while you can impact them, you can't completely decimate them like you can in other games. So there is that, and there's that softness to it. And I don't think I ever look at this category as marking things like that up or down. I always think about it, can you get better at it? Is it satisfying to win? That's the competitive nature of it, I think. And I think the more you played this, the better you got at it, the more you would care. And that, for me, is that's positive competitiveness to me. So I gave it a 7. I don't think it's the best ever, in the world, but that's where I settled.
So that's really interesting, because I also scored it a 7.
Interesting. So very, very different sort of takes, but kind of settling on the same score. Yeah, I think higher would be wrong.
Yeah, no.
But I don't think it deserves lower than that. No. Okay.
All right, and then our final category under two-player rating is scalability, or FOMO. So, would this play better with more people?
This is an interesting one. Because I've heard a lot, and like I say, caveat, I've never played it, but I've heard a lot that Wingspan kind of sucks at 2. I don't find that with this, and I don't know if this is because it's a different enough game to Wingspan, but it plays absolutely fine at 2 players. Like, I don't... There's no massive negatives for playing with 2 that I can see. The conversation with me really starts about talking about playing this with more and what that means. But go on, you had a point there.
So I think the bit where quite often people say at 2-player it sucks is around when you're fighting for resources, or in this case when you're fighting for your guild point slots, because quite often when you get that bonus, then you get either at 12 o'clock or 6 o'clock, top or halfway round, there are usually only 1 or maybe 2 of that available, so actually it becomes like a little bit of a fight to get there.
But if you play with more players, you flip that card over and there's more slots.
Is there?
Yeah. So those cards are double-sided, and there's a 2 to 3 player side and a 3 to 4 player side, I think, and you can choose which one you want.
Possibly why I should read all the rules before we review these games.
Yeah, well, yeah. We always split the setup, listeners. We always have our own jobs, and usually the randomisation of tiles is mine. So you've just never seen that really. But yes, you do. That does flip. So playing with more, I don't think would change that much.
No, I don't think it would.
And I think they've balanced it with that in mind. What I think is interesting, if you're playing with more people, is I think the mix of victory points, particularly from the end of round scoring, would be far more of a mix.
Yeah.
I think it does have a little bit of a runaway leader problem when you're playing with 2 in that sense, because I think from the experience, the games that we've played, usually one of the 2 of us wins 3 out of the 4 of those. I don't know if you've noticed.
What I'd also point out, though, listeners, is that if you tie, you both get first slot.
Top slot, yeah.
So you don't...
Unlike June, where nobody wins, you both get second slot if you tie. Yeah.
Perhaps, maybe...
There'd also be a market scarcity issue, particularly, I think, if you play with 4 people. or 5, it goes up to 5, you still only have those 3 cards for that entire round.
But you can you can pull from the top of the deck for most of the cards, so you can just go from the deck.
Yeah.
But there are some, particularly on cave cards, that will allow you to do something really quite powerful, which is take a cave card from the marketplace
From the
and
display,
play it
yeah.
instantly for free.
Yeah.
So
There's
if
one
you're
for
doing
dragons. There's one for dragons as well.
Yeah, so if you're doing that in your final slot, well, that costs you 2 eggs, and that's quite expensive. But if obviously there's nothing in the display, then
The card becomes almost useless.
Yeah, that card becomes useless.
So there's that scarcity of display element, which I think would be interesting. I don't know if it would be better or worse, but those cards would run out a lot quicker because you're not getting any more cards, and people are taking twice, 3 times, 4 times the number of moves. That's going to disappear really quickly on into the round. Yeah. And then, interestingly, you are more into the random luck-based element because then you're just having to top deck cards all the time. And maybe that makes the game worse. I don't know. I haven't played it, but there's a part of me that goes, maybe it's not as good.
It's unusual, I think, for me to play games and never think, oh, maybe a third would help here, or a third person. And actually, I've never had with this.
No.
I've always been completely fine with it being 2 of us.
Aside from this review, it's never even entered my mind.
Yeah.
If you told me this is a 2-player game, I'd go, yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, and I'd love to, if anybody wants to engage on this, I'd love to hear if that is actually the case in Wingspan, or, it's the classic, oh no, we must play with more than 2, the board games are useless when you only play them with 2. I know that element of discourse seems to exist, but I have heard that it was rubbish and some expansions fixed it a little bit. And I really wonder what it is that they changed in this, they made it that way, because from my perspective, this is perfectly fine at 2.
Yeah.
I have nothing that I can criticise it over, and I can't. I do think having more people, a third or a fourth, would make the game slightly different, and I'd be intrigued, and I quite like to play it like that. But I don't think it desperately needs it.
No. So how did you score it? So I left my scoring criteria blank because I couldn't work out how to score it.
I teeter between a 7 and an 8 on this one, and I'm going to settle on an 8.
Yeah. So interestingly, I think I was going around a 7. Although maybe I should have rated it higher, because if I've never played it and I've never gone, maybe having a third would help, then probably actually it should be higher.
Yeah,
so,
it's never even entered your mind. And
yeah.
That's zero FOMO, and that's also works very well at 2. We really rated it generally as an 8. And if it never enters your mind that, this needs more people, that's a good score for that one.
Okay, fair enough. I will call it an 8 then.
Okay, shall we tot the scores up then? Okay, so that gives us a overall rating, 2-player rating of 6.5. So as always, we round to a 7. I think, given the splits in the scoring, that probably makes me more happy than you. But
no, I think it's a fantastic 2-player game. Don't get me wrong. I think it's just that table talk category.
Yeah, I think we have a big difference of opinion.
Yeah, we have a real difference of opinion on that. Do I think it's a bad 2-player game? No, not at all. I just think that if you're going in there looking for a game that is going to, encourage you to have discourse with your other player, then this probably isn't necessarily the game you would want to pick.
Yeah, fine.
It's not a bad score. It's just it's not a talky one.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mother of Dragons. Thank you for joining us.
Mother of Dragon. Singular dragon.
Single one. So thank you all very, very much for joining us. As always, if you like what you heard and this is your first time joining us, please follow us on your podcast medium of choice.
And hello.
And hello, welcome. We've got a good chunk of content up there now. I think this might be knocking on our 20th full episode. And if you do listen to us on your podcast medium of choice, a little review would go a long way, and I really appreciate that. But until next time, be good to each other, play lots of board games.